Imagine this. A family lunch. Pretty normal, right?
Okay.
In a quiet little town in regional Australia.
Just seems like any other Sunday gathering. Good food, family around.
Exactly. But this lunch, well, it didn't just end normally. It kicked off this deadly mystery that honestly captivated people everywhere.
It's pretty striking, isn't it? How fast a simple home-cooked meal turned into this massive legal drama.
Yeah, and it forces everyone really to think about intent. What was really going on?
That question of intent.
That's really the absolute core of this deep dive, isn't it? We're looking today at the Erin Patterson case, often called the toxic mushroom murder trial.
And the central question, the one the jury had to wrestle with, was chilling.
Absolutely. Was putting those highly poisonous death cap mushrooms into a homemade beef Wellington. Was that just a terrible, tragic accident?
Or was it something far more deliberate? A calculated act of murder? That's the question.
Right. And to really get our heads around how incredibly tough answering that is, we're leaning heavily on the live updates.
Yeah, the ones from BBC News, right as the verdict was coming in. It gives us a real sense of the key details, the arguments back and forth.
The sheer complexity of it all.
Exactly. From inside the courtroom, essentially.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We want to unpack the accusations, look at the defense arguments, and just explore the human side of it all.
The drama, the tragedy.
Yeah, behind what's become one of the most talked about trials, well, in ages. Hopefully help you understand not just what happened, but maybe why it resonates so much.
Okay, so where do we start? The basic facts.
Yeah, let's lay those out. So Erin Patterson, she's 50, mother of two. She ended up facing 3 charges of murder.
And one of attempted murder.
Right. The lunch itself, that was back in July 2023, happened at her place in Leongatha, which is in regional Victoria.
And the guests were her in-laws, Don and Gail Patterson, both 70.
And Gail's sister, Heather Wilkinson, who was 66.
And tragically, all 3 of them got sick after the meal and died just days later.
Just devastating. Heather's husband, Ian Wilkinson, he was there too. He survived incredibly.
But only after weeks in hospital in an induced coma. A really close call.
It really paints a picture of how sudden and catastrophic this was.
And there's another detail here, a crucial one that came up a lot in court.
Ah, yes. Her estranged husband, Simon Patterson.
Exactly. He'd actually been invited to that specific lunch.
But he pulled out. Last minute, apparently.
Yeah. And that wasn't just a footnote. The prosecution and presumably the jury had to think about that. Why wasn't he there? How did that fit into the sequence of events?
It adds another layer, doesn't it? So let's shift to the prosecution's case. This is where things get, well, quite pointed.
Their argument was built around deliberate action.
Right. The prosecutor, senior counsel Nanette Rogers, she didn't just say Erin Patterson served poisoned food by accident.
No, the claim was much stronger. It was alleged calculation deception.
Rogers argued that Mrs. Patterson knew she was putting toxic death cap mushrooms into that beef Wellington, knowingly.
And they didn't stop there with the allegations, did they?
No. The prosecution also claims she'd lied to her relatives, saying she had cancer, possibly to, ensure they'd come to the lunch.
A manipulation tactic, essentially, is what they were suggesting.
And then, according to their narrative, she poisoned them and even faked being ill herself to try and cover it all up.
It's a pretty damning picture they painted, but it raises that interesting question about motive, doesn't it?
Yeah, usually in these big cases, the prosecution tries to lay out a clear why. Why would someone do this?
But here, they seem to deliberately sidestep providing a concrete motive. Or perhaps they couldn't find one they could prove.
Instead, their whole case seemed to pivot on her actions after the lunch.
Exactly. That became the cornerstone. Her alleged lies, the repeated inconsistencies in what she told police, what she told medical staff.
Especially about where the mushrooms came from, the whole foraging story.
And then the big one, dumping the food dehydrator, the one apparently used to prepare part of the meal.
The prosecution argued that those actions, the lies, getting rid of potential evidence, that spoke volumes.
Right. They presented it as undeniable proof of guilt. Consciousness of guilt, they'd call it.
Prosecutor Rogers had that really potent line.
Oh, yeah. She has told lies upon lies because she knew the truth would implicate her.
That really sums up their strategy, doesn't it? Focus on the cover-up, argue it proves the initial crime.
It's a powerful argument. If someone's lying that much afterwards, it makes you suspicious about the event itself.
But then, you're on the jury.
Yeah.
How do you weigh that against the defense's explanation?
Well,
which is just
Yeah.
Completely different.
And that's the crux of the challenge, isn't it? Because the defense came back with a narrative that was just as compelling in its own way.
They didn't dispute the lies, did they? Or dumping the dehydrator.
No, they acknowledged those things happened, but their explanation was starkly different.
They said it was panic.
Pure panic. They argued she accidentally used poisonous mushrooms, a horrific, devastating mistake.
And the lies, the ditching of the dehydrator, that was all driven by fear afterwards.
Exactly. Fear of being blamed for something catastrophic she didn't intend, a sort of terrible spiraling sequence of bad decisions driven by sheer terror.
So it shifts the focus, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It asks the jury to interpret the reason for the deception. Was it covering up murder or covering up a mistake out of panic?
Precisely. It becomes about judging the nature of those lies and actions, not just the fact they occurred.
Wow. So you've got these two incredibly powerful yet totally opposite stories.
On one side, deliberate poisoning, calculated cover up, maybe even manipulation to get the victims there.
Even without a clear motive being spelled out.
Right. And on the other side, a tragic, awful accident.
Followed by a total meltdown. Fear, panic, leading to lies and disposal of evidence.
And the jury had to sit there for 10 or 11 weeks?
Yeah, reports vary slightly, but around that long, listening to all this, weighing it all up.
Imagine being in that room, trying to untangle truth from deception, from possible panic, from grief.
Especially when it involves family and such a devastating outcome. The emotional weight must have been immense.
It really does highlight the huge responsibility we place on juries in these complex cases.
They're not just looking at forensic reports or timelines.
No, they're assessing human behavior, credibility, trying to understand intent or the lack of it based on conflicting accounts.
Sifting through the lies, the counterclaims, the alleged panic. It's an incredibly difficult task.
Trying to reach a conclusion about guilt or innocence when the narrative is just so incredibly clouded.
So, just to recap where we've landed in this deep dive, we've seen that stark contrast at the very heart of the Erin Patterson trial.
Yeah, the prosecution story. Intentional poisoning, deliberate deception, disposing of evidence.
All pointing towards calculated murder, they argued.
Versus the defense? A terrible accident with the mushrooms?
Followed by absolute panic, which then led to the lies and the dumping of the dehydrator. Same actions, totally different alleged reason.
It really does underscore the immense challenge that jury faced over those 10 weeks.
Sifting through all that evidence, the testimony, these two opposing narratives.
Trying to determine guilt or innocence in a case that was just so nuanced, so emotionally charged.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? I mean, outside of a courtroom, how hard is it for any of us to truly know someone else's intent?
Especially when things go tragically wrong and maybe deception does come into play for whatever reason, panic, guilt. Who knows?
What does a case like this really tell us about, say, the fragility of trust? Especially within families where you least expect something like this.
And also about the justice system's relentless search for truth, even when the facts are murky, obscured by tragedy, and potentially by lies. How do you find certainty in such complexity?
A really difficult question, something to definitely keep thinking about.